Hello and welcome to setting up your Mac for photo and video editing. I'm really excited to get started. In this first movie, we're going to start really simple and I'm just going to introduce you to the components of a Mac and what role they play in editing photos and videos. Don't worry if you're totally new to Macs and the OS X operating system. In a later movie, I'm going to be going into the details of the operating system. Just sit back, watch this movie, and don't worry about following along. To talk you through the components that go into a modern Mac, let's have a look at Apple's iMac. First, there's the display. This is where any photos or videos you're editing are gonna show up. That's where you're watching this movie right now. Almost all Apple Macs come with different size displays. The inch measurement is from corner to corner along the diagonal. So with the iMacs, they're either 21.5 inches on that diagonal or 27 inches on that diagonal. The screen resolution then is across and then up. So with the 27 inch, it's 2560 pixels across and 1440 up. A pixel then is each individual point of light. They can display millions, or on some high-end displays, as you'll see, billions of different colors. If you get in close with a magnifying glass, you'll be able to see each individual pixel, but from normal viewing distance, the display will just look seamless. The price is something we're going to come to in a later movie when I discuss the entire Mac line. While it won't directly affect your photo and video editing, worrying about the price might distract you. Apple makes some amazing computers, but no one's ever accused them of being a budget company. With the processor, we start to get into the real internals of the computer. The processor, and you might also have heard it called the CPU or Central Processing Unit, is sort of like the brain of the computer. Anything you do on your computer is converted into numbers in binary. Everything from a letter to a number to a 24 megapixel picture are represented by a string of zeros and ones. Whenever you do something on your Mac, these strings of binary are sent to the processor for processing. Depending on what's needed to be done, the processor performs some mathematical operations and then outputs the result. For example, the color of each pixel can be represented in binary. If you use an adjustment layer that brightens up a specific pixel of an image in Photoshop, that instruction gets sent to the processor, where it computes what the result should be and sends it back, and the change is displayed. The speed of the processor is how fast it can deal with these requests. The faster the processor is in gigahertz, the more requests it can deal with per second. You'll also see multi-core processors. On iMacs, you can get dual-core or quad-core processors. These are simply extra processors. So a dual-core processor has 2 processors, and a quad-core processor has 4 processors. Because of how software works, they're not twice as fast or 4 times as fast as a single core processor. Extra cores make it possible to parallelize tasks. This means that the CPU can work on 2 things at once. However, it's really difficult for software developers to change their applications to accommodate that, and that's why you don't get the full speed boost. In general, the faster the CPU, the better, and the more cores it has, the better, but only if you can take advantage of that. Applications like Photoshop and Premiere Pro are quite good at that, so you will notice a difference if you go from, say, the 2.7 GHz to the 3.4 GHz, but the difference between the 2.7 and the 2.9 is going to be much less noticeable while you use it. The processor is a really important component for editing photos and videos because, as I said, everything you do gets sent through it. If you're working on large files, you're going to be sending a huge amount of data through the CPU, so the faster it can get it back to you, the faster you'll see the results, and the faster your Mac will be. As important as the CPU is, it's not quite as important as memory. More than anything, RAM is what will affect the performance of your Mac when you edit photos and videos. Memory is just super fast storage. You know how long it takes to transfer a file from a USB key to your hard drive? With memory, it takes a fraction of a second. Unfortunately, it's expensive and can't store data unless there's electricity running through it, so it's no use for long-term storage. What it's really useful for is the stuff you're working on right now. Whenever you're editing a photo, the data gets moved from the hard drive to memory. That way, the CPU can get to it really quickly and act on it. If you've ever been using a computer and everything's been going fine and then all of a sudden it's slowed to a crawl, it means you've probably run out of RAM. Once that happens, the CPU has to start pulling data off the hard drives, which are much slower. All of Adobe's applications are really RAM intensive. For a long time I used a 13-inch MacBook Air with 4GB of RAM. That thing could slow to a crawl if I had too much open, even with the solid state drive in it. Memory is even more important with video editing because you're dealing with much larger file sizes. While 8 gigs is standard for most people, if you're a photographer and a videographer, you really want to be looking at 16 gigs. On some Macs that's not going to be an option, but where it is, I'd recommend you upgrade RAM before you even consider upgrading anything else. Next, storage is where all the data is kept. Unlike memory, it can keep data when there's not a charge running through it. So this is where all your photos and videos are going to live most of the time. Apple offers 3 kinds of hard drives: standard hard drives, solid state drives, and fusion drives. A regular hard drive uses a spinning magnetic disk. It's what computers have been using for years now. In the last 5 or 6 years, since the original iPhone, flash storage has become much more popular. This is what's in SSDs. It's far quicker, the CPU can get data from it much faster, but it's much more expensive for the same capacity. While a 1TB hard drive might cost you €100, that would only get you a 128GB solid state drive. To get the best balance, Apple's developed their fusion drives. These combine a small solid state drive with a larger hard drive. OS X automatically moves the files you use most from the hard drive to the solid state drive so they can be accessed with the greater speed of the SSD. It's really quite a neat solution. If you've got the option to have a solid state drive, I'd recommend you take it if you can handle the lower storage. If you need the extra storage, you've just got to accept the little loss in performance. But if you've got the option of a fusion drive, that's what I'd really recommend you take. In the highest end iMacs, you can get a 3TB fusion drive. That's all the storage you're going to need, along with a nice fast SSD for all your applications and the operating system. Finally, there's the graphics processor, or GPU. The graphics processor is actually very similar to the CPU, except instead of having 2 or 4 cores, it's got thousands. GPUs are fantastic for tasks that can be easily split into thousands of little pieces. That's why they're used to drive displays. Rather than processing each pixel individually, they're able to do hundreds or thousands of them at once. While you might think GPUs are really just for gamers, they're also really useful for photo and video editors. Some tasks, especially exporting, can use the GPU to increase how fast it can be done. This is called graphics acceleration. There's broadly 2 kinds of GPUs. There's integrated graphics, which are part of the CPU, like Intel HD graphics or Intel Iris Pro graphics. And then there's separate GPUs like the NVIDIA GeForce, which is a separate card and a separate processor within the Mac. For photographers, a GPU is nice, but it's not essential. For video editors, it's more of a consideration. They will really speed up how fast you can export files, but they won't affect the editing workflow as much. If you're content to wait an extra bit of time while your files export, then you won't notice the lack of a GPU too much. And that's it for this first movie. In the next movie, we're going to move on and we're going to start looking at the individual Macs available. Just from watching this movie, you should have an idea of what choices to make when you're selecting one. But just to be safe, I'm going to go through the lines and make some recommendations.